Often defendants, especially in state courthouses, they come in and they want to make an argument. They want their case dismissed. Really, the arraignment is for the limited purpose of informing the defendant of their rights, giving them the opportunity to read the indictment, and a discussion of bail. And every judge handles his or her courtroom in the way they see fit. So I think your instinct is right. Likely the judge allowed Maduro to make limited statements. We're listening to them in real time here, but likely the judge is giving him a little leeway. But I am certain that most judges, including Judge Hellerstein, if Maduro goes on too long, the judge will reel it in, because the purpose of an arraignment is simply not to grandstand. It's not for motions. It's not for challenging jurisdiction. It's a very straightforward appearance. But it is up to the judge the degree to which he wants to let Maduro make some minor statements here.
The attention inside court has now turned to Maduro's wife, Celia Flores, who is also being indicted here by the U.S. Department of Justice. She is an influential figure in Venezuela and has been in her own right, the former attorney general in that country. She's been accused in this indictment of working alongside her husband to partner in this massive drug trafficking alleged conspiracy, this narco trafficking conspiracy, accused on her own of accepting bribes, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth as part of that as well. And Laura, she is now addressing the court.
Hallie, and similarly, she is saying, I am the first lady of Venezuela, again, trying to position herself still in power, still in a position of strength and authority. She was asked to stand by the judge. He said to her, "You heard my summary of the indictment." She said her attorney received it. She heard the summary. She acknowledged that her attorneys are here by her side, and the judge, again, going through sort of the routine statements of, if you can't afford an attorney, the court will provide one. How do you plead to the counts? And she has pleaded, as did her husband, Hallie, not guilty. She's saying completely innocent.
These dramatic moments inside court, just to remind folks, no cameras there, which is why we're reading you these notes from inside. And Danny, the proceedings against these two, they are separate but parallel. Fair?
Absolutely. I mean, they're in the same indictment. They are co-defendants. They're considered co-conspirators. So the case against them, while factually distinct, is going to be largely identical in the sense that you only need to convict the conspiracy itself to hold all the co-conspirators liable for everything every member of the conspiracy did. And we talked about earlier how you see those charges of, for example, machine guns. They don't necessarily have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Maduro himself handled machine guns, but rather that he was part of a conspiracy that used firearms to achieve their unlawful drug trafficking objective. So, as we've discussed several times before, this is, in many ways, a straightforward drug and firearm case in a jurisdiction that handles more than its fair share of drug and firearm cases. So, in that sense, you may say it is typical, dare I say typical, for a case like this. But of course, the international implications and the certain challenges to U.S. extraterritorial jurisdiction to come will be very significant. I should point out, Hallie, that many folks may not know the U.S. already exercises extraterritorial criminal jurisdiction in many instances. I've handled cases in which our Coast Guard is thousands of miles away from the U.S. in open seas, boarding ships and indicting and arresting individuals who have never set foot in the U.S., who are nationals of another country. And so this is nothing new, extraterritorial jurisdiction. However, under these facts, the extraction of someone who claims to be the president of a foreign country, because the government's going to say Maduro is not the president, but bringing a head of state to the U.S. in this manner, that will certainly be challenged, and nobody can say for certain whether or not what the government here did was lawful or unlawful.
Danny, let me ask you about something that is happening in court in literally the last 15 seconds or so. The judge has informed Nicolás Maduro that he has a right to consult with consular officials. Maduro is taking him up on that offer, essentially, saying, yes, we want that kind of a visit. What does that mean, and why would Maduro accept that?
Yes, that is a right. You do have a right, and in fact, that right goes both ways, often for Americans who are abroad and find themselves arrested. But it's often really a hollow opportunity. The consulate is very limited in the assistance that they can give. And again, that works both ways, both for Maduro here in the U.S. and, of course, for U.S. citizens who find themselves arrested abroad. The consulate can help with some minor things, but the true advocate for Maduro and his wife now will be their lawyers. Those are the people that can really get things done for the Maduros going forward. But of course, they do have that right to confer with members of the consulate. They will get that opportunity, and presumably that will happen relatively soon.
Laura, let me go back to you here, because at this point, the prosecution is now going through what they have described as some housekeeping items, basically logistics as part of this court proceeding, after we have seen probably the most dramatic moments of the course of the last hour or so, which is, of course, Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, pleading not guilty. In Spanish, again, this is being translated as both of them have made defiant statements about how they are still, in their view, the president and first lady of Venezuela.
Yeah, Hallie, defiant, saying, I'm still the first lady, I'm still the president. He's saying, I was captured at my home, I've done nothing wrong, I'm innocent, I'm not guilty, I'm a decent man, I'm still the president of my country. Defiant words there from Maduro in court. At this point now, the prosecutor walking through, again, some of the more housekeeping matters as it relates to their obligations to turn over any exculpatory information to the defense, things that could help the defense team. You might wonder why they would do that. They're required to under the law. Prosecutors have a requirement to do that, and if they don't do that, it can be disastrous for their case. The judge explaining the consequences for noncompliance can be dismissal of charges or dismissal of the entire case. So he's walking through the prosecution's obligation to turn that over, the prosecutor acknowledging that order, and so that's being formally entered. We're also getting just some color from inside there, which I assume we'll get a lot more once Sam Brock comes out from the courtroom, Hallie, but just that Maduro is moving around in his seat. He's looking over to look at his papers, appearing engaged there, according to our team that's watching all these proceedings play out in court. I would imagine, Hallie, this will not go on for much longer now that he's pled guilty. He's been informed of the charges. They're going to walk through probably a couple more procedural matters. Again, because all of this is happening with the benefit of an interpreter, it will move a little bit slower, but this is probably coming to a conclusion in the next, I imagine, 10 minutes or so, Hallie.
Laura, stand by for us. It is not just, of course, our team watching every minute of this from the courtroom, but the rest of the world, including Venezuelans, as we take you now live to the region, to Colombia, where Gabe Gutierrez is standing by. All of this happening, as we have heard from Nicolás Maduro's son, almost simultaneously as his father is being arraigned in federal court in the United States. Maduro's son, also named in this indictment, was not extracted by the United States. But Gabe, this is coming at a moment of a paradigm shift for the region and of the expansion of what's being called the Trump doctrine in Latin America.
Yeah, certainly, Hallie, and a lot is happening. And right now in this region, there is a profound sense of uncertainty. We're seeing it right now here in this border town in Colombia. We're in Cucuta, and the Venezuelan border is right behind me. That's the border crossing right there. You see the Colombian military has set up these tanks right behind me, and they're all watching what's unfolding right now in lower Manhattan. Now, I have been actually speaking with Venezuelans throughout this morning. Right behind me, they cross through this border crossing each day. We spoke with a family just a short time ago that came with all of their belongings that they could because they were so worried about what was going to happen. One man didn't want to speak to me at length talking about politics because they still feel for their family members inside Venezuela. Another woman I spoke with said she was very grateful for what President Trump had done. Still, others in this region are very worried about what happens next. You mentioned the remarks by Maduro's son inside the National Assembly, and there's a huge question about the power vacuum inside Venezuela, the opposition in Venezuela, the military leaders there. Who will control Venezuela, and what is next for the Trump administration? The president making some strong comments about other countries in this region, including Colombia, including Cuba, and also making remarks about Mexico as well. So certainly there's a lot of people in this region wondering what this Trump doctrine means going forward as we continue to watch those ongoing developments in Lower Manhattan.
And amid those sweeping questions, Gabe, and I want to go back to Laura Jarrett now, the more mundane logistical procedures of this arraignment here, that is, of course, anything but typical when you look at the geopolitical implications. It is a significant moment, Laura. And just to bring folks into this here, again, minute by minute, we are getting updates from our team inside court. At this point, prosecutors are going over some various housekeeping notes. The judge is speaking. Interestingly, Laura, the Maduros, it sounds like, have asked to keep the notes that they've been taking in court about these proceedings.
They have, and the judge is saying, I believe that you can keep them. The prosecutor acknowledging that they're going to work with the defense counsel. Sometimes you see defendants want to keep notes like this, especially when the notes could potentially contain attorney-client communications. There's a lot of sensitivity around that. There's also, security considerations about what they can take with them when they're in federal custody. But the judge saying in this case, I believe you can keep them. There's also a letter apparently from Barry Pollock and Mark Donnelly, the two defense counsel in this case. We haven't seen this letter quite yet, but it's talking about the various procedures that they're asking to be taken in this case to work with the defense, between the prosecution and the defense, so the defense can represent their clients zealously and fully. Interestingly, also, Hallie, Pollock, the, again, counsel for Nicolás Maduro, saying he's not seeking release at this time. Not seeking release of his client.
Laura?
Because he knows his client's not going to get out in this case right now, Hallie. He knows, given all the considerations here, he doesn't have to ask for release at this time. He can change. Obviously, that at any time, and he can seek it at another point. But he's saying he's not seeking release at this time without prejudice, which means that he can obviously make an application for bail later on. And so he's asking for some time there, and to be able to do that. And the judge will obviously consider that at the appropriate time when he makes that request.
Well, the other interesting piece of this, too, Laura, and this is coming in seconds ago, is that the defense attorney for Nicolás Maduro has now raised the question of the legality of the military extraction. Laura, you and I and Danny have talked over the course of the last couple of days about this. Not unexpected, of course, that the defense team would bring this up, questioning the legality of the Trump administration, the military going in to remove Maduro forcibly in that operation from Venezuela.
And that's something that's going to get raised in a motion. That'll be a legal filing that will outline all the reasons that they think it was invalid. And then that will kick off what will, inevitably be a protracted series of arguments, right? The defense will write their side, the prosecutor will write their side, and then the judge will hold a hearing and hear arguments from both on that. And so that's why I say it will take a while. That's not something that the judge would be expected to resolve today. That's something that's going to require a fair amount of research from the judge and his clerks to figure out exactly what issues are at play, and knowing that whatever happens, it will get appealed. And so that's something that's going to take a fair amount of time. The judge, acknowledging that some dates will have to be discussed here, and the defense attorney saying he expects there will be voluminous discovery, meaning what exactly the government has on Maduro and all that went into his apprehension.
Danny, let me go to you here, because they've also set a date for what sounds like, I don't know if it's firm yet, but they're discussing mid-March now for the next court appearance, roughly 60 days from now. What do we expect to happen then?
That date will likely, you'll see an update on the issues of discovery, and then we'll get a little more idea of where they're going to go with motions. And Laura was absolutely right. This is a 30-year mandatory minimum case and a firearms and drug case. There's virtually no chance at this stage that Maduro was going to get bail on a case like this. So you move forward and you really focus on the important elements and Maduro's best chance for an actual possible dismissal of this case on issues that are very likely to at least go to the Court of Appeals, if not the United States Supreme Court. And that's whether or not the apprehension of Maduro and his wife in Venezuela by law enforcement and U.S. military was itself lawful. And actually is a secondary issue, because there is case law saying that even if an apprehension abroad violates that country's law or international law, it doesn't necessarily foreclose domestic prosecution here in the U.S. So this is a very complex issue. It will require a significant amount of discovery and information before the motions can be fully briefed.
I want to go to Courtney Cuby now, our senior national security correspondent, because we've just learned, too, in court that there are apparently, according to Celia Flores' defense attorney and Maduro's defense attorney, some health and medical issues. They are asking for Maduro and his wife to get the appropriate medical help and detention. And Celia Flores' attorney is saying that she has some, what he calls, severe bruising on her rib that is going to need some attention here. Courtney, it sounds as though that is obviously the after effect, the fallout from that military operation in which Maduro and Flores were taken from their home in Caracas.
Yeah, well, you know, Hallie, when we were working on the possible sort of timeline of how this all unfolded overnight Saturday night, one of the things that we were trying to figure out is exactly how long Maduro and his wife were on the USS Iwo Jima and then on the U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford. We've asked the question but not gotten the answer, frankly, about whether when they brought them on board, they did medical checks and they sort of established a baseline of anything like that. Like, did they have bruising? Did they have any injuries that may have been a product of or a result of that late night raid that took them both into custody? We haven't gotten an answer to that, but the reality is that's pretty standard if they were going to bring them onto a U.S. military ship like that. And they definitely have those kinds of capabilities, if not on the Iwo Jima, which is an amphib, a pretty large ship. Definitely on the aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford. But even if not, when they would have brought them into the United States up to New York, they would have most likely gone through some kind of medical checks there as well. You know, one thing that I'm just fascinated by this entire process, and I know we've been talking about this all weekend, is just the overall legality of this military operation in and of itself. You know, we can't lose.
Which, by the way, Maduro's defense attorney has raised now in court. We expect that to be a legal motion that happens over the course of the next several months.
That is going to be a fascinating discussion, how that plays out, because we can't lose sight of the fact here of what occurred. There's a lot of emphasis on the fact that the United States military and law enforcement officials went in the dead of the night. They picked up Nicolás Maduro. They were executing on this indictment and his wife. Yeah. But what we can't forget is that in advance of that, essentially setting the conditions for that extraction team to move in, the United States military took a series of military strikes against the Venezuelan military, a sovereign nation's military forces. And then, as we later learned on Saturday, there was also a number of different gun battles that also occurred, resulting in injuries on the American side and, we believe, deaths in Venezuela.
Court, thank you. 30 minutes of history in that courtroom that you are looking at in New York City as Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, have been escorted out. The Venezuelan leader saying in court, "I am the president of Venezuela." His wife saying, "I am the first lady." Both of them pleading not guilty to these charges of narco-terrorism conspiracy brought against them by the United States after that military operation just 48 hours ago. Laura Jarrett, this arraignment is winding down. Maduro and his wife are now out of the room. They are presumably heading back to that facility where they had been booked and processed, and both of them will remain behind bars.
A place behind bars, Hallie, which is not pleasant. A place that has housed the likes of Sean Diddy Combs, Sam Bankman-Fried, Luigi Mangione, not to mention a host of other high-profile defendants. A far cry from where they were in Venezuela as the president and first lady of their country. We haven't seen any more signs that they made any more statements before they left. But we did see, according to our team there in court, that Maduro stopped to look at the gallery before he was escorted out of the courtroom. Again, probably taking in the scene that was just playing out before him, a dramatic scene. Also noteworthy, Hallie, that his attorney, Barrick Pollitt, signaled the legality of the issues surrounding how he was extracted out of Venezuela, calling it a military abduction, which I think is our first sort of peek at where this is going, Hallie. You know, it's not surprising given all the circumstances that we saw play out on Saturday of how he was extracted, but I think it's where this is going next in terms of the legal battles ahead, which I mentioned will be quite lengthy, but we do expect, at least according to the judge here, that they will be back in court on March 17th at 11 a.m. there in New York, Hallie.
I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander. As we've noted here, Peter, the world has been watching what has unfolded here in court, listening to what Maduro and his wife have been talking about, and President Trump, White House officials keyed in on this as well.
I think that's right, Hallie. In many ways, this is bringing the world stage to an American courtroom. The world is watching, even if they're listening, in fact, since they can't see it for themselves. What is happening behind those doors here in Lower Manhattan at this time? No indication yet whether the president himself has been watching this play out or getting updates from his staff here at the White House, but we know the televisions inside the West Wing were tuned in to this over the course of the day. A couple things I want to pick up on. First, what we heard from Maduro that Laura just noted, that in effect he said that this was a military abduction. That reflects language not too dissimilar from what Delcy Rodriguez herself said, the interim, the acting president of that country, the Maduro loyalist who had served as vice president beneath Maduro immediately after he was captured, saying that it was an illegal kidnapping, saying there was only one president in that country. We heard from President Trump, who was particularly fierce in his language, speaking about Rodriguez, saying in effect that unless she gives the United States total access and meets America's demands right now, that she will face a situation, a resolution that is even more harsh than that Maduro had seen so far. Rodriguez, notably a bit more diplomatic, softer in her tone late yesterday, saying that she and the Venezuelan people deserve peace and dialogue, not war. And it really underscores this unique challenge that the president is facing right now. In many ways, what's happened so far was the easy part, in spite of it being a stunning, surprise, daring raid that happened before dawn on Saturday. The real challenge for the president right now, in many ways, is what he faces ahead. Transforming Venezuela, which he has described as a mess, as a broken country, into a stable, functioning one. Overnight, he repeated his assertion that we are in charge, that the U.S. is in charge right now, while noting among his immediate priorities sending in American oil companies to take over Venezuela's oil supply and repair the infrastructure there. As he has said, we are running the country. We heard from Marco Rubio just yesterday, speaking to my colleague Kristen Welker on Meet the Press, that we're not running the country, we're running it in terms of its policy. But the president, when he had an opportunity to clarify later, said, I know it's controversial, basically, but we are in charge. As I've been speaking to senior officials here at the White House, they say that the U.S. is in charge, but it's not literally running the country. In fact, the U.S. is basically exerting maximum leverage or pressure on Venezuela and its leadership right now as it relates to oil, demanding that Venezuela basically bow to the president's demands.
Peter, thanks. I'm going to ask you to stand by, as we have now learned that obviously Nicolás Maduro and his wife are out of the courtroom. They are departing court any second now. We do expect, just to give you a sense, we do expect to have a live look at that. And remember why that is interesting here. Earlier in the morning, just after sunrise, we saw Maduro being transported from that facility where he's been spending, obviously, the last day and a half behind bars to court. He'll be taken back there. And in those images, Maduro clearly aware of the optics, clearly aware of the cameras flashing that thumbs up to the rest of the world here. And you heard him in court sounding that same defiant tone. I want to bring in Tom Winter as we're waiting for that live shot to come up. The second we get it, you will see it right here. And Tom, when you talk about the legal proceedings set to move forward, part of this is going to involve classified information, presumably, given the nature and the scope of the indictment against Maduro and his wife.
Yes, and we know that, Hallie, because the federal prosecutors have to tell the court that they intend to use classified information and that they need to bring in the attorneys in this case to get them to sign documents, make sure they're cleared to receive that information, and also make a promise that they're not going to make that information public in the course of their filings, or if so, to do it under seal. That's something that has already taken place in this case. As we mentioned before, this proceeding began earlier today, that in fact there had been a prosecution going back to 2011. And I want people to think about this as we wait for our colleague Sam Brock to get mic'd up, because we did see him leaving the courtroom. It's a trip I've taken too many times before. But basically, in this case, if you want to think of the cartel of the Suns here, this is this group that federal prosecutors say is responsible for using violence, using money, using illegal means to get the drugs out of Colombia and other places in South America through Venezuela. That's why they say we're here in the first place. If you want to equate that to the American mob, that's effectively what the Maduros have been charged with here, is basically being at the top of that, if you will. That's the allegation that they received compensation and money and were involved in corruption in order to let these drugs go through. But a part of that will no doubt be intercepts that the U.S. has of conversations, discussions that have occurred, basically their ability to electronically eavesdrop in order to help make these cases. That's how a lot of these drug cases are put together. This was a case that was put together by the DEA well over a decade in coming up with it, and then was charged, Maduro specifically, back in March of 2020. At the time, Bill Barr pushing this case forward. It was definitely a topic of discussion in the Trump administration leading up to the COVID-19 shutdown back then. So that's how this case came together. That's some of the conduct that's been alleged here. And now this scene that we're looking at outside of the courthouse, where we'll see Sam Brock shortly, you've got people that are obviously very happy with what has occurred here and the arrest of Maduro and his wife. You've got a number of individuals who are not happy with this and the U.S. efforts in Venezuela. The NYPD having to deploy a second ring of barricades, calling those in because of the size of the crowd outside of the courthouse. They do have a number of different ways to be able to get Maduro and his wife out of there and presumably back to the heliport in Wall Street on a good day.
Yeah, walk through that, Tom.
Yeah,
those steps.
So without going through some things that are there for security, and as somebody who's regularly in that courthouse, frankly, for our own security, there are a number of ways to get somebody out of that courthouse and then out of where this huge crowd is, basically to get them out via vehicle, to be able to get them to the Wall Street heliport if, in fact, they're going to use a helicopter. And then it's a very short flight. If it takes 60 seconds, I'd be shocked, back to that jail facility.
Tom Winter, thank you. I want to go now to Sam Brock, who was inside that courtroom for those historic moments as Nicolás Maduro and his wife were arraigned on American soil. Sam, tell us what it was like inside that room.
Hallie, one of the most remarkable arraignments you could ever imagine, right? You've covered court cases throughout the course of your career. You're hard-pressed to remember anything like this. So Nicolás Maduro walks into the courtroom with his wife, Celia Flores, right around noon. And immediately, so first of all, he is wearing orange garb from the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, a black shirt over that. Hard to tell, Hallie, whether or not he was handcuffed or not when he first walked in, but he is right away shaking hands with all of his attorneys. He nods at the people in the gallery, both on the side where the public was seated, as well as the journalists. It almost looked like at one point he cracked a smile, was greeting his attorneys, getting situated. His wife came in as well, Celia Flores, I might add. It was hard to tell at first, but then this was brought up by their attorneys, had bandages on her face and had bruising around her eyes. They discussed the fact that she was injured during detention and even mentioned possible fractures to her back or other parts of her body when the question around medical attention came up. So we'll get back to that in a second. But when I say remarkable, so they come in, Maduro has 4 U.S. Marshals behind him. They sit directly behind Maduro. While he is seated then and facing the judge, Judge Hellerstein addresses the court. He proceeds to read the charges, certainly the narco-terrorism, the cocaine importation conspiracy, the weapons-related charges, gets through all of that, and then says to Nicolás Maduro, "Are you Nicolás Maduro?" And he says, Hallie, first, "I am Nicolás Maduro of Venezuela. I am president of the Republic of Venezuela. I have been kidnapped since January 3rd. I was captured at my home in Caracas, Venezuela," which at that point, Hallie, the judge steps in and says, "Wait a minute. We're going to get to all of that. I just want to know if you're Nicolás Maduro."
Interesting.
And he says, "Yes, I am." And in fact, he's wearing headphones the entire time, right? Because he's hearing the interpretation, the translation. He actually interrupts the translator as she's trying to articulate to the judge and to the court what Maduro is saying. He's so eager to sort of state his case. So again, this was very anomalous in terms of what happens in what are normally perfunctory arraignments and hearings. So they go through that. The judge reads through the charges, okay? Then he asks him whether or not he's seen the indictment. And Maduro and his attorney, Barry Pollock, who, by the way, represented Julian Assange, well known in the field of criminal defense, He's also known for negotiating a plea agreement to get Assange out of jail, also represented one of the Enron executives who was fully acquitted on criminal fraud charges. He's representing Maduro in this case, and he said, I have briefed my client, but he hasn't actually read the indictment. And so then the judge says, do you want the court to read the indictment? Maduro says, no, I don't, but he does want to have consultation on it. The entire time this is going on, both Maduro and Flores are taking just scrupulous notes. I mean, you could see their notepads when they stood up at the end of the court proceeding, just filled with information. Maduro wanted to make sure that the court knew those were his notes. He's entitled to them. Am I allowed to keep them? The judge said, sure, you can keep the notes. So this all goes on, and then the judge asks Maduro whether or not he has been briefed on his rights, and by rights not just to counsel, but also to silence. And when that exchange goes back and forth again with the translator, he says, this is the first I've been told of that. It's not clear whether or not Maduro was referring to whether or not he has to speak with police and law enforcement, or whether it was right to counsel, or what aspect of his rights he was just being informed about for the first time. That was a very interesting interaction as well. And of course, the pleas, right? So we get to the pleas. The judge asks Maduro how he pleads to these 4 counts. He says, soy inocente. I am innocent. I am not guilty. I am a decent man. At which point the judge again intervenes and says, okay, we were just looking for guilty or not guilty. Not a fuller explanation. Don't worry, there is going to be time for that. Very similar, by the way, with Cilia Flores as well. She says, yes, I am Cilia Flores, First Lady of the Republic of Venezuela. She acknowledges that she's seen a summary of the indictment, but not the actual indictment itself, and goes on and says, you know, we're okay to waive the reading at this time. She planned on getting fully briefed, but he says, you know your rights, and she says, yes, I do. She also says, not guilty, completely innocent, when she is asked whether or not she is guilty of those crimes. The narco-terrorism is just for Maduro, but the other 3 counts do apply to Cilia Flores. So this is all transpiring, Hallie, you know, and then we find out, you know, do they have a right to consular notification?
That's right.
And they are both interested, both Maduro and his wife, in speaking with someone from a consular figure from their own government to get more information. Absolutely interested in that. And then one of the most bizarre things happens at the very end of this very brief arraignment. It was, what, 30 minutes or so. Maduro turns around, waves to the crowd. Not clear if he's waving at someone in particular or just in general, but a man stands up, and I want to quote this directly to you so I don't get it wrong. He says, you will pay on behalf of Venezuela. And Maduro says, in the name of God, I will be free. This is all happening at an arraignment in front of dozens of people, right? I mean, we just know this is not normal playbook legal sort of stuff. So
Not at
all
all.
of that,
Sam,
I would just raise one other thing, and I'm sure you'll have some follow-ups here. If I may just raise one other point, which is that Barry Pollock, the attorney for Maduro, said that I absolutely plan on filing motions regarding the legality or illegality, and he used the word of Maduro's abduction, and also pointed out that he is a head of state and afforded certain rights of immunity. So expect in the days and months to come, those motions will be forthcoming. But they're not right now. Next steps in this, March 17th is 60 days from now. That's the next court hearing that's scheduled at the moment with Judge Hellerstein, and that's about discovery and sharing information that the prosecution has with Maduro and his legal team and Flores and her legal team. But just an extraordinary 30 minutes in U.S. federal court that just transpired.
Sam, a stunning play-by-play from you. I want you to I have some follow-ups for you, but I want to explain to people what they're seeing here. This is a live shot from above. We expect Nicolás Maduro and his wife to leave court. They will be transported back to that facility where they will be held behind bars for the remainder of these court proceedings. Sam, let me ask you about this outburst in court. Again, not something we typically see, as we have said so often over the course of the last couple of days here. Do we know who the person was that stood up and, it sounds like, Sam, yelled at Nicolás Maduro?
He did. He did. I wouldn't say he yelled. He just said, matter-of-factly, you will pay. The court officer there immediately pointed at the man and told him to stop talking. And I did see probably 2 minutes later, once the arraignment was over and everyone was preparing to leave the courtroom, he was apprehended by officials and taken away. What the consequences will be, not quite clear. But as we have this conversation about someone standing up in the face of Maduro, I will tell you, at 500 Pearl Street, where we are right now, the site of many a protest, there's dozens of people right now with Venezuelan flags that are happy and cheering the end of Maduro as the leader of Venezuela and calling for his justice, while just across basically a divide, there's a whole group of other individuals that are concerned with the manner in which the U.S. carried out this military action, and they're saying that it's illegal. So you have sort of these conflicting viewpoints on the doorsteps of the federal courthouse as this man, who to this point is unidentified, stands up solely, no one else was standing, and looks right at Maduro as he's waving and says, "You will pay for this."
It sounds as though, Sam, that Maduro had a degree of command in the room, the ability to make those remarks about his character and about his innocence to the judge. Sometimes in these arraignments, we hear just a single word or two from the defendant. That was not the case here. Maduro addressing the person who stood up in court and addressed him. Was that your sense of how the proceedings went?
1,000%. And I will tell you, for Venezuelans who have lived under this regime, they're familiar with his showmanship. Talked about Peter Alexander this morning, the dancing on stage that the U.S. government in the recent weeks interpreted as some sort of act of defiance. Well, this is someone that clearly felt like a showman when he walked into the room, which I think is what was most striking to many of us. I mean, here he is walking in under the custody of U.S. Marshals, and he's nodding to everybody there, even kind of cracking a smile, waving as he leaves the courtroom. It was almost like he felt like he had a command of what's going on. Obviously, this is someone who's been the president of a country for the last 10 plus years, but he was literally interrupting the translator when she was trying to translate what he was saying and continuing this commentary with the judge when the judge was only looking for, 1 or 2 word answers. Now, obviously, he probably didn't understand the exact protocols of the U.S. legal system, but it was incredible to see just the presence that he had in that courtroom, that he felt comfortable enough to act as if he was running the show, not necessarily, the judge and the justice officials.
And Maduro, it seemed at points, Sam, acknowledged that he didn't have command of the U.S. justice system. At one point saying to the judge, "I didn't know I had some of those rights," more or less, as we are seeing now, some of the movement now from outside court. Sam, stick with me because I have to ask, you mentioned seeing visible bandages and what appeared to be bruising on Celia Flores. Any visible sign of injury on Nicolás Maduro?
No, none. His physical stature is just so tall. He was taller than the other 4 people that brought him into the room. He was erect. He felt, very energetic. He didn't seem like someone who had been injured. I mean, obviously, we've been documenting the fact that Maduro keeps showing thumbs up every time he is in front of a camera, whether that's at, the DAA processing department in Chelsea or it's underneath, the chopper as he's getting onto a helicopter at a helipad. He seems to be very much projecting this image of power. He did not seem injured. His gait was normal, but it was surprising for sure, once you really started to pay attention to it, to see exactly what Celia Flores' face looked like. I mean, there were clearly bandages there, obvious bruising, and I have a feeling that that's going to be brought up front and center here before too long.
Sam, stand by for 1 minute because we are seeing now this movement here in Manhattan, in New York City, what appears to be Maduro leaving court. Let me bring in Tom Winter, who has tracked movements like these countless times over the years. Where does Maduro head next? Where does Celia Flores head next?
Right, so they're coming out of what's called as Park Row. After 9/11, Hallie, this whole area was sealed and locked down. After coming out of that federal courthouse, the green vehicle there is known as a Bearcat. That's a heavily armored vehicle, and the NYPD Highway Patrol now in the lead. This is also next to their headquarters. So this area is always generally very secure in Lower Manhattan. They've obviously got what's called a route set up. You'll see the police officers blocking traffic, so they will now be able to quickly take him. I have not received any reports that the Brooklyn Bridge has been shut down, so it looks like they'll probably get him back to the Wall Street heliport. This whole thing should take only several minutes at this point because they can block this off easily, and they've done this many times before. The reason for this, I know folks are going to look at it and say, look, this is an enormous amount of taxpayer dollars, and it is, that's being used to do this. It's just that in order to get him safely there without having an incident and disrupting this whole judicial process, having any civilians injured, any members of the public, they want to be able to get him to a spot where they can just fly him to Brooklyn. You might remember in previous high-profile proceedings, I'm thinking of El Chapo, when he was tried in New York. In other cases, they want to make sure that there's no members of the public that are injured. And to do that, they'd have to shut down the Brooklyn Bridge or other major arteries in New York City. And that's just something that becomes untenable. So it's easier to fly them, and all indications are at this point, we'll know fairly shortly here, because they have an opportunity to get on around the bridge or to get to the heliport, they will likely go to the heliport. This is right behind the entrance to NYPD's headquarters, as well as the federal courts downtown. And this is going to be an effort by the marshals, by the DEA, in order to get them there. And at this point, it looks like they are making the turn to get down to the heliport. That's at least where it looks like to me where they're going to head.
And that is presumably, Tom, where we will see another image of Maduro in person being walked back into the helicopter. We saw the earlier one just after sunrise, very early this morning, as Maduro was being taken out. Again, aware of the camera angles, candidly, aware of his visibility, aware that he was being watched by people around the world. And I want to bring back in Sam Brock to the conversation because, Sam, I understand that in just the last maybe 2-3 minutes here, we have heard now from Maduro's defense attorney for the first time outside court.
Yeah, so Jonathan Dean, our colleague at WNBC, apparently just spoke with Barry Pollock outside of court and asked him about comments that were asserted that he was abducted when Maduro said he was abducted by the U.S. government. And Pollock said something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing here, of what Mr. Maduro said in court speaks for itself. And that is part of the conversation that's going to be ensuing here in the coming weeks and months, Ali, is the idea of using force in an international relations capacity like that, which is explicitly prohibited unless it's in defense of a country or it's sanctioned by the United Nations. And so what he meant in terms of the use of the word abduction is not clear. Maduro, well, at least it's clear enough that Maduro said he felt like he was kidnapped. Pollock used the word abduction, and he said it's complicated, it's voluminous in terms of the motions that we're going to be filing, but you can expect that that's where we will be taking this case next. Once they resume on March 17th, again, that's to reconnect and to be able to share and update the judge on where they are in terms of sharing documents and discovery. But it was striking to hear Pollock say what he said in court, his client, speaks for itself.
Let me go to Laura Jarrett, our senior legal correspondent. And Laura, the semantics matter when it comes to the legal proceedings here. The fact that Maduro used the word, as Sam is talking about, used the language kidnapped, his attorney talking about abduction, that's significant.
It's significant, not surprising, given his position on this, Hallie. But while he may feel it was a kidnapping or an abduction or the like, with some signal of something being unjustified, his attorney is still going to be under the burden to convince a judge down the line, which it sounds like he'll want to do, that his detention is not legally justified, right? And so there will be a number of different arguments to marshal in their favor on that. But this isn't a case that is as if it's routine in any sense of the word, or that this is happening all the time. And so they're going to have to, do what they can to marshal arguments without the benefit of a ton of precedent for similar circumstances. I can't really think of a similar situation. We've talked about Noriega in the past, but it's not as if this is happening on a routine basis so that they'll be able to marshal a bunch of cases in their favor. The Justice Department, on the other hand, has an enormous interest in this case and seeing him put away for a long time. As we've talked about, he was charged back in 2020. They didn't, by any stretch, do anything like this. They didn't make any attempt, at least as far as we know, and reporting has shown, to manage to extract him back then, probably believing that they couldn't. And so now they're going to be working tooth and nail to try to keep him behind bars. But it will be up to that judge to decide down the line, imagining in months from now, whether or not his detention and his arrest was valid, whether or not his rights were valid or were violated in some way. And then, Hallie, of course, there will be appeal after appeal. And so I think, for people who are watching this all play out, during that time, unless his lawyers can figure out a way to get him out, he is going to be behind those bars in Brooklyn, and it is not a pleasant place. This is a place that's been subject to lawsuit after lawsuit for the conditions in there. It is going to be a far cry from the kinds of places that he's been enjoying up until this point.
And you are seeing now those images from earlier today, Maduro leaving that Brooklyn facility, flashing that thumbs up, and of course those images there of the military operation overnight. There it is again as we are watching. And just to give you a sense, listen, our helicopter's in the air with our NBC News New York station there. We are tracking the movements of Maduro and his wife as they are being transported here. Let me bring in Richard Engel, because as this is happening, Richard.
Now, your forecast first from the 4-Zone Weather Team, certified most accurate.
It is looking a little brighter outside. Live look, Raul B. Rodriguez low weather camera. Not as dark and gloomy as it was this morning. 68 degrees, still plenty of clouds though. 60 degrees on the dew point. That means the air is becoming more saturated. Air temperatures 60s and even 70s, warmest across the eastern zone. As we go through the day, we are going to see some breaks of sun, and that's going to help to warm us up into the mid and upper 70s this afternoon. 80s or near 80 for the rest of the week, and then a cold front moves in. I'll track that for you coming up.
Venezuelan President Nicolás